Hi, this is Tom Soane and welcome to another episode of The Anonymous Landlord. And today I'm going to talk through some of the biggest concerns for landlords right now. And these are real people with real concerns because I asked a few of my landlord clients what they're most worried about right this second. And as we're recording this, it's October, so we're starting to come into the winter months. It's 2020, so we've been through and are still going through this whole lockdown, coronavirus, COVID-19 type stuff. But also, this is relevant to the general way of life for a landlord, the things that you're most worried about anyway. It might not even necessarily relate to just the current situation. So I'm going to go through tenants not being able to pay their rent, tenants losing their jobs, property prices dropping, negative equity, the constant updating legislation and rules and regulations and compliance that landlords have to follow, boilers and plumbing repairs as we're coming into the winter months, properties being empty, mortgage rates going up, meaning mortgage payments go up, finding the right tenants, finding the right letting agents as well. I'm going to go through all of those things. But let's start at the beginning right now, because this is a big concern for everybody. It's probably the number one reason that landlords are nervous about investing in property, property investors are nervous about investing in buy-to-let. Tenants not paying rent. Now, there's a few misconceptions here. There's a few fears that need to be overcome. But first of all, let's talk about the two types of tenants that are unable to pay rent. You've got what I would class as bad tenants. Now, these are people that just don't want to pay their rent. They think it's someone else's problem. They think the world owes them something. And if the landlord is put out by them not bothering paying the rent because they got smashed for the weekend and they just spend their money on all hosts of other things, and it's the landlord's problem, I don't care. Landlords are all swimming in money anyway. It's their problem. They should pay it for me. Now, those are bad tenants, the people that kind of choose voluntarily not to pay the rent. Now, I just think they're bad people. And then there's the other side that unfortunately bad tenants ruin it for. And these are good tenants that just have a change in circumstance. Now, I promise you, if you're watching this or listening to this, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, your circumstances have changed too over the last however many years, 50 years since you were born. Circumstances change all the time for people. Nobody leaves school, gets a job and has no circumstance change for the rest of their lives. Just doesn't happen. And sometimes it's through reasons outside of your control. And that's the same for Mr. and Mrs. Landlord. It's the same for Mr. and Mrs. Tenant. It's the same for Mr. and Mrs. Letting Agent, Mr. and Mrs. Business Owner or Investor. Everybody goes through different circumstances at some point and sometimes multiple points in their lives. So, look, bad tenants. What happens if you've got a bad tenant that just decides not to pay their rent? Maybe they were receiving housing benefit or something like that, and then they decided to go and start working cash in hand. The council find out and they stop their benefits. But the bad tenant decides, no, do you know what? I'm just not going to bother paying my rent. I haven't been earning any money. I've been paid cash in hand. Fine. That's the mentality of some people, unfortunately. Spongers, if you like. And unfortunately, they just go round making other people's lives misery because that's just the way they are. So what do we do with those people? Now, look, I'm going to look at this, first of all, what the process should be, and also what is the worst case scenario, because there's two sides to it, isn't there? Of course, we've got to get that tenant out. Now, yes, at the moment, right on this day of recording this, there are eviction ban type restrictions in place, or eviction restrictions in place, easy to say, eviction restrictions in place, which means you now have to wait a certain amount of time to evict a tenant. So have a listen to my other stuff about that, because that is its whole episode on its own. So so first of all, we've got to evict them, we've got to get them out. Now, under normal circumstances, you go through the process. If a tenant falls more than 2 months in arrears, then you go through the process of giving them a section notice, whichever section notice is relevant to you at that time. At the moment, it's a section 8, but that may well change in the near future. Give them a section 8 notice, and then after that 2 weeks has expired, this is in normal circumstances, by the way, After that 2-week notice period has expired, then you can apply to the courts and try to gain an eviction. Now, if you haven't followed in fact, my other podcast or my other video, everything you need for every single tenancy, every single time, if you follow that stuff to the T, to the letter, then you can carry on through the eviction process without too much problem. If you haven't and you've missed a few bits out here and there, which is very easy to do for DIY landlords, then you'll need to go back and make sure you've rectified those things. Look, hey, give me a shout. As you all know, I offer 15-minute discovery calls, and you can use that discovery call for whatever you like. Just drop me an email or a message through my Facebook page to do that. So, and I'll check it all through with you. I'll go through your compliance with you to make sure you can evict safely. And that's free, by the way, you might as well take it. But anyway, so if you go through that eviction process, get to the end of that eviction process, get the tenant out, replace them with another tenant. And in a minute, I'm about to tell you about finding the right tenants and how you do that. So wait for that. And that kind of leads on from you've evicted the tenant and now you're going to find the right tenant to move in again. Secondly, we've got on the other side of all of that, you've got the good tenants that just can't pay, changing circumstances. Now, these tenants are the types of people that they might have lost their job. For an example, lost their job, or the company they worked for goes bust or something like that, then you can talk to that tenant, be open with that tenant and say, hey, look, I need some of the rent coming in. These are my mortgage payments that I've got to cover. Be open and honest with that tenant. And you can guarantee that type of tenant is trying to find additional work. So if they've lost their job, tell them to go and apply for universal credit, because right now a lot more people are entitled to universal credit than they ever were. So go to universal credit, make the application. You should be able to get some support from that, which helps you, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, get your rent in. Number 2 is ask them to talk to this is in the current situation, ask them to talk to their credit providers, loan providers, utility providers, all of those people that they're paying bills out to ask for support. And most of those suppliers and lenders and companies and institutions are actually providing support for people that have had financial difficulty. If that tenant is a business, they can apply for bounce back loans, interruption loans, council grants, which not a lot of people know about. And that might, again, help them in their business be able to pay some of the rent. Because you can guarantee the good tenants, they want to pay their rent. They want to keep that security of a roof over their head. But, sometimes circumstances just change. So offer them all those things, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord. And if they still can't pay the rent, they still can't afford, then think about the worst case scenario. What's the most that's going to happen? And I'm going to go back to the bad tenant now. If the bad tenant just doesn't pay the rent, sometimes you just need to know what you're going to lose. I know that sounds horrific, but sometimes you've just got to know what you're going to lose. Now, bearing in mind, if you get to court and the eviction process happens, you can still apply to recover that debt, because it's a debt. That tenant owes you that money. They have a contract which states, I will pay you this rent every single month. Now, so it just means that in that interim period of time, you may well lose some money, lose some cash flow. It's just cash flow though. So, what is the worst case scenario? What's the most you're going to lose? Look, you're probably going to lose 6 months worth of rent. So if you calculate it for that, it might be a little bit more, it might be 8 months, depending on whether you've messed up all the compliance at the beginning. And I'm sorry to say that. But you know what? This is if you choose to be a DIY landlord or a self-managing landlord, these are the risks that you take. It may well be a lot more than that if you haven't done every single step of compliance at the beginning. So, my advice would be just use a letting agent. It's the safest way to manage a rental property. And hey, if you want me to connect you up with a letting agent in the area that you live or your property is, then do it. Just send me a message through my Facebook page. I am linked with most of the good agents around the country. And you know what? If I don't know someone in that city, then I'll let you know. But chances are I probably do. So anyway, with the bad tenant, we've gone through that whole eviction process. In the worst case scenario, I'm going to assume you've done all of the compliance. And there's so many things you need to do. I'm going to assume you've done it all. If you've done all that, then 6 months, you could stand to lose 6 months cash flow. Now, once that eviction process is complete, you can then apply the courts, you can then have the courts recover that debt for you. And they'll probably do that by way of a CCJ, or they'll try and settle it in that actual eviction hearing. I'll leave that up to the judge to decide. But one way or another, you should be entitled to that rent coming back. For the good tenants, what do? If they can't pay the rent, then the chances are they're going to go and get another job. And if you talk to that tenant, and this is what I'm saying really with being open and honest with them, as long as they know that you need to pay a mortgage payment, at least at minimum, they might be able to get some sort of work to pay that mortgage payment. And I know it's not the full rent that you're entitled to, but get the most essential thing done first. Get that mortgage payment paid. You don't want to start missing mortgage payments, because then you'll start jeopardizing your chances of getting further funding at good rates or remortgaging later on down the line. So try and get something from the tenant, build a payment plan in. Now, there's a little way you can do that. It's by renegotiating the AST, or the Assured Short Hold Tenancy contract, and building the additional debt into the rent, and then tying them into that future contract for another 12 months. So for an example, if they're paying £800 a month normally, and they end up building up a debt with you of, I'm just making this up, 2,400 quid, then you can just cancel that AST contract, sign a new AST contract for an extra £200 for the 12 months. And you'll get your money back over that 12 months plus the original rent. But make sure that's affordable for everybody, because there's no point tying them into a payment plan if they can't afford to keep it. Just puts them back to square one, doesn't it? Think of the longer term as well. If that tenant is a good tenant, you want them to stay. So make sure you're helping them, but don't lose money. You are entitled to make profits, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord. I know, it's mental, isn't it? Because you're already swimming in cash. So, all landlords are loaded, right? Anyway, so tenants not paying rent, losing their jobs, all of that sort of stuff. Hopefully that helps with that. Property prices dropping. Oh, this is a big one, isn't it? Everybody in property, or who wants to get into property investing and landlording, is concerned about property prices dropping. Now, as we say this right now, there was a headline a few weeks ago saying that property prices in the UK are going to drop by 22%. Now, personally, this is my opinion, I don't think that's going to happen. Of course, the newspapers are going to say that sort of stuff because they want you to click their links. They want you to buy their papers. They want you to visit their website so they can sell advertising space. Their sole reason for being is to sell newspapers, sell advertising space, and get you to click on their site. You do all of those things, they can make more money from advertisers. That's what it's all about. It's nothing to do with news. They'll just write whatever they can write. And that's a great headline. So think for yourselves. Be logical here. When was the last time property prices dropped by more than 20%? It didn't really happen. Very rarely, maybe after the war. Now, I'd be interested to get some actual stats here when the property prices have dropped dramatically. And I'm talking dramatically. Because let's think of it like this. If property prices drop, and you've got a buy-to-let mortgage, you've got a property investment, and which has got a mortgage on it, the chances are you've got mortgage of up to 75%, because you can only borrow up to 75%, which means you've always got 25% equity there. So if property prices drop by 25%, then at that time you're just breaking even. But you're not going to sell it. You're not selling it today because you bought it as an investment. So you're actually going to rent it out for the next 10 years. Now look at that same historic data and see when was the last time property prices dropped so dramatically, and then how long did it take for them to recover? That's how long you're going to keep your property for. It might be a case that property prices dropped by 10% and then took 10 years to recover. Okay, there you go. Now, if you think of it like that, I think half the problem is the British media. You start to think that, oh shit, there's going to be a big problem here, when actually there's not. And if there is a problem, then you know what the bigger picture is. But so many people get that fear of the headline rather than, okay, let's think about it. what are the actual chances of this happening? Very minimal. Now, look, I'm not saying that it's impossible. It's absolutely not impossible. It could happen. Property prices could go to nil. It won't happen, I don't think, but it's very nearly impossible. But what I'm saying is that the chances are so small that prices are going to drop by more than your equity in your investment property. Now, I'm not talking about your personal home. I'm talking about your property investments. So when you see those headlines, I dare you to put a comment on the newspapers or the media channels outlet saying bollocks or something like that. That will cause some controversy. Don't do that. Anyway, right, next. Continuous updates on legislation, continuous changing legislation, rules, regulations, processes, compliance, all of that stuff is constantly changing. And over the last 10 years, there have been so many more pieces of legislation that have come into play. I feel sorry for DIY landlords. Did you know there's 178 different pieces of legislation that affect landlords now? Unbelievable. But the big ones are enabling tenants to sue landlords directly and enabling councils to come after landlords and keep the penalties they're charging them. So you've got tenants are going crazy, you've got councils are going crazy, and they're all coming after landlords because it's a free bit of money now, isn't it? From landlords that just haven't got the compliance right, whether it's intentional or not. They're coming after you. Do you know the average fine? I heard the average fine from councils to landlords is £15,000. Now that's very quickly going to damage your return on investment, right? And I don't mean to laugh about it. It's true though. This is all happening, but there are so many DIY landlords that, and you're a DIY landlord for different reasons. Number one, it's trust. Number two, it's money. Don't trust an agent to look after your property. Number two, don't want to spend the money because you feel like you can do it yourself. I mean, I've got mixed opinions on that, but you know that's up to you. And number three, there's also that I guess probably trust, isn't it? That feeling of, well, I can do all of it myself. But if you're that DIY landlord that's feels like you can do all the DIY jobs yourself, or the maintenance, repairs and things like that, you're in big trouble. It's going to happen, unfortunately. And then you've got ROPA coming in, which is the regulation of property agents. And landlords don't realise that you, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, are going to have to get qualified to be a landlord. I know. Licensing is coming in whether we like it or not. Regulation of property agents is coming in whether you like it or not. And the rule is that anybody who has any kind of interaction or administration or management of any kind to do with a tenancy is going to have to get qualification. And they're talking about a technical, I think it's the level 3 for ALA. And landlords, I mean, this is a big qualification. It takes 18 months to get done. So anyway, that's that. So look, yes, that is a big concern for landlords right now. Again, I would obviously say, look, just use a letting agent, be an anonymous landlord, let them deal with it, and you just enjoy the money coming in. There's no point you spending an hour or two a month on your property, potentially getting it wrong in order to save an hour or two's worth of value of your time. How much do you earn per hour in your job? Now, if you're spending that time and potentially getting it wrong, then go and work an extra 2 hours a month in your job and get that money for yourself to use to pay the letting agent. Because that's what you're good at and that's what they're good at. Anyway, I could do a whole thing on that. Boiler and plumbing repairs as we enter the winter months. This is a biggie. Things like pipes start cracking and, you know, your boiler's been quiet for 6 months or 4 to 6 months, whatever it is. And then all of a sudden it's on intense. It's constantly used. And it causes a lot of problems. So my advice to you on that, very quickly, right this second, today, go and get the boiler serviced, bleed the radiators, and go and warm up the pipes gradually. Just go and or ask your tenants to, turn your boiler up very low, minimal heat, and just leave that on for a couple of hours, turn it off. Then the next day, turn it on for a couple of hours, turn it off. And just basically just let the pipes gradually get used to going from cold to hot. Same with your boiler. Just don't put it full on straight away, intense. It's like anything, isn't it? If you've got a car and you stick it in I don't know, in your driveway for 4 months, and then you go and hammer it 100 miles an hour down the motorway straight away, it's going to go wrong. Something's going to happen. It's the same with you, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord. Think about it. If you've sat on the sofa all day and you've watched Netflix and you're there just catching up on, I don't know, Homeland or something, that's what I'm just watching at the moment. And then, you sat there from 9 in the morning all the way through till 7 at night, just watching all these episodes, lovely. And then you get up and sprint for 200 meters, you're probably going to injure yourself, right? So it's the same thing with your boiler. So the next thing, by the way, I was just going to say, get it serviced. bleed the radiators, gradually increase the heat of the boiler, and don't be so intense with it. That's the key. And your tenant should be able to support you with that. Next thing is the property being empty. Now, this is assuming that, I guess this one came from a client whose property is not being tenanted. It's on the market, ready for let, not being tenanted. I see this so many times. Because, and for an example, if you've got your property on the market at £900 a month, right? And this is my area. I mean, your areas might have different rent values, but let's say it's on the market for £900 a month. And actually, I'm just going to round it up to a nice easy 1,000. So your property is on the market for £1,000 a month, right? And because you think, you know what, it's been rented out for 4 years for £950 or £900 a month, and now I think I can get a bit more money for it. So you stick it on the market for £1,000 a month, and it's empty then for 2 months because you've got less people. It's maybe the top end of that rent or that rental property category. Maybe it's a big 3-bed house, something like that. It's been empty for two months. So you've lost £1,800 in order to get an extra £100 a month. Now think about it like that. That means that you won't get back to breaking even. Even if it rented after 2 months, you've lost £900 a month for 2 months. So you've lost £1,800 a month. You've lost £1,800. And even if you did then rent it out straight away after that 2 months for £1,000 a month, you're only going to get an extra £100 a month. And it's going to take 18 months to get back what you lost. Now, what if it takes 3 months? Now it's £2,700. Hang on. £2,700 that you've just lost to try and get an extra £100. That means it's going to take over 2 years to get that money back. And so on and so on and so on. My advice to you is this. Put it on the market for what you want to put it on the market for. You will know after 2 weeks whether it's going to rent quickly or not. 2 weeks. Your letting agent will tell you after 2 weeks. Work with your letting agent. If you put it on the market for £1,000 and after 2 weeks it's not generated any firm interest, then drop it. Drop it to £950. Because look, you can move a tenant in at £950 and you are able, as long as it's in line with market value, you are able to increase that rent down the line. So don't just leave a property empty. Reduce the price for now. It's an investment, remember? Investment. You've got to make sure you've got money coming in. Otherwise, it's just a poor investment. So you can drop it by a bit to increase it in the future. You can increase it multiple times over the course of the entire tenancy. So don't stick it on the market and leave it there too expensive. Definitely don't do that. Another way as well is that have a look at your listing. And if you're a DIY landlord and you advertise your own property and find your own tenants, then I hope anyway, you've watched my video or you've listened to my podcast about finding tenants and about finding the right tenants, because it all comes from your listing as well. And if you're not advertising on Rightmove, like for an example, I offer what I just call an advertising only option. It's only like 47 quid, I think it is, where basically you send me the photos and you can use my Rightmove account. I'll upload it for you. We'll send it out to all of the tenants on Rightmove, because the better tenants go on Rightmove and more tenants go on Rightmove. Something like 5 to 1. There's like 5 tenants that search on Rightmove than go on things like Gumtree and Facebook and stuff, right? So find the right tenants. Use my service if you want, or do this yourself with your own letting agent or with a letting agent that you know. But just get them to advertise it on Rightmove for you. But get proper photos. Take them all in landscape mode. Do not take portrait photos, please. And anyway, I did the whole thing on how to actually advertise that property to get the best tenants and the top rent. So the property being empty, there's a few different ways. There's so many more than this. I mean, I'll do more on that, actually. I think that's an interesting one. Mortgage rates going up. Yes. Oh, this is a big one. If you've got a rental property that's got a mortgage on it and mortgage rates start creeping up, your mortgage payments are going to start creeping up. And that means you either make less profit. No, we don't want to do that because we are entitled to make profit, aren't we, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord? Or you can increase the rent. Now, what happens if the tenant rejects that rent? It's not their problem. Right. Now, let's think of this logically. If mortgage rates go up, then your mortgage payment, yes, is going to go up. Unless you're on a fixed rate, of course. But if they do go up, then you're going to need to adjust the rent accordingly. Now, remember it like this. You have to make profit. So work it out right now. If you're making, let's say you've got £1,000 a month rent coming in and you're paying out £500 a month to your mortgage and you're paying out £200 a month for management and maintenance, and roughly speaking, you're making 30% of that rent payment is profit, right? Cool, nice figures. Now, you still want to continue making 30%. So if your mortgage payment goes up, you just recalculate, I'm making 30% profit, that's my profit margin on my rent, and then work out what the rent needs to be. It might only be a tenner. And if it's a tenner, then fine. Or calculate when you're going to increase the rent. You might not jump that straight on the tenant right now. You might say, well, I'm not going to increase by £10 now. I'm going to increase by £20 in a year's time, right? Better investment for the future and so on. But don't worry about mortgage rates going up because it just changes the number. It just changes. Nothing changes for you personally. It just changes the rent money, the rent income. Finding the right tenants. I've told you a bit about that. Use Rightmove or Zoopla, and Zoopla if you can use both. I mean, my agency do both. So we'll have Rightmove and Zoopla, and you pay us 47 quid. We build the listing for you. We broadcast it to all of the tenants on our database as well as on Rightmove and Zoopla, all of their tenants as well that are currently searching. And that's a really good way of getting tenants. And then you just get all the inquiries. All the tenants that come along through those channels just get sent to you. It's a really good way of finding the right tenants. But finding the right tenants goes a bit further. You've got to do your due diligence on the tenants if you're doing it yourself. I'd use a letting agent. And again, my company provide that service. It's almost like a pay-as-you-go service. You can use them for advertising only. You can use them to qualify all the tenants and manage all the tenants. You can use them for I can't remember now. Anyway, all those different things. But you can use them for those things, for finding the right tenant. You can use my company for doing all the referencing, the employment checks, the income and expenditure checks, the credit checking, and so on. And there must be other agents that do the same thing, just like a pay-as-you-go basis, almost like a menu system. So like in that instance, I would just send you like a menu. Here's all the services that we can provide to you. Choose which ones you want. Here are the fees associated. And normally what I try and do is work out how long that takes my staff to do and then apply my small percentage of profit. The next one is finding the right letting agent. Yeah, that's a big one as well because like I said earlier, landlords don't use letting agents because of trust, because they don't want to use the money, or because they feel like they can do the job themselves. But if you find the right letting agent, they have to be the ones that come recommended, first of all. They have to be the ones that you feel like you can work with, and the initial engagement is you feel trustworthy. But finding the right letting agent is vital because your letting agent will keep you compliant and your letting agent should keep you profitable. Like in my letting agent, for an example, I built it. So that means that my letting agent is focused around property investment, meaning my agents, my staff are all focused on making the landlord's property profitable, keeping the risk low, making the landlord anonymous. And that's my whole way of life. So finding the right letting agent, go and find them and do like, look, if you want me to recommend them to you, please let me know. But all of this goes towards the same thing. If you're going to be the best version of yourself at one thing, then you've got to be the best version of yourself at everything. And this is another thing. And as always, my name's Tom Soane, and this is the Anonymous Landlord.